For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails, and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
The Metro Council Business Meeting of March 2nd, 2023 to order, and ask Connor to play the safety video for the folks in the hall.
I'm Bob Lee, one of the animal curators here at the Oregon Zoo, and safety is a huge part of our job. We focus on the safety of our guests who come to spend time with us every day, the staff who works very closely with these animals, and for the animals themselves. I'm here at the Oregon Zoo and you're in the Metro Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairs to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at the zoo.
Thank you. Connor, will you please call the roll? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. Councillor Simpson.
Good morning, Connor.
Good morning. Councillor Lewis.
Here.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Good morning. Present.
Good morning. Councillor Nolan.
Present.
Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal is excused today. And President Peterson.
Present. Thank you. We will now open public communication. Connor, will you please describe to the audience our procedures for the public communication portion of the meeting and non-agenda items?
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll be managing the timer to go off of the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak in advance, you can do so now. You can do so if you're joining us in person. You can sign up by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room. If you're joining on Zoom, you can sign up by hitting the raise hand button, which, depending on your version of Zoom, is at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. If you're dialing in on your phone, you can raise your hand by dialing the *9 button. As a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. And also, just as a note, folks, we'll have 2 public comment periods today. This one is, again, for non-agenda items, and a little bit later we'll be taking testimony on ordinance number... Ordinance number 23-1490. So with that, if anyone would like to give testimony on non-agenda items, please go ahead and hit that raise hand button. All right. I'm not seeing any hands going up. I'll give folks just another moment. And still no hands have gone up, President Peterson.
Great, thank you. We will close the public communication on non-agenda items and follow that with a presentation of Code of Ethics follow-up. From the auditor's office. Do we have Brian Evans?
Yes, he's joining virtually today, so I'm promoting him up now.
Awesome. Our Metro auditor is here to present on a follow-up. Good morning, Auditor Evans.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. Apologies for not being there in person. I'm recovering from a cold, so I appreciate the virtual meeting option for today's presentation. I'm here today to present the results of a follow-up audit we completed last week, or published last week, on Metro's Code of Ethics. This was a follow-up on a December 2019 audit that found that stronger connections between organizational values, legal requirements, and policies and procedures would build a better foundation for managing ethics. Without it, Metro is at increased risk of employees interpreting and taking action based on their own set of values. The audit included 8 recommendations to strengthen the foundation for ethics, reduce barriers to understanding expectations, and increase consistency when addressing ethical concerns. Transparency about who was seeking to influence decisions through lobbying was also identified in the 2019 audit. In August of that year, we issued a letter to management that summarized a pattern of out-of-date information which appeared to violate Metro Code requirements. The letter included 2 recommendations to ensure complete and accurate information about lobbyists was available online. The follow-up audit found significant progress was made to implement the 8 recommendations in the audit report. We found that 4 were implemented and 4 were in process. I'm going to read the 4 that we considered to be implemented, and then I'm going to detail a little bit more about the ones we found to be in process, so that you can understand where we saw the progress as well as some of the areas for additional work. So the 4 that were implemented were to provide training, to assign responsibility for analyzing ethical risks and trends, to use the analysis to determine if additional preventive or corrective measures were needed, and to clarify department roles and responsibilities for investigating potential ethical issues. So great work in the last 3 years to implement all of those recommendations. The 4 recommendations that were still in process were the following: to integrate the Code of Ethics with related policies, laws, and organizational values to make the relevant guidance easier to find. For this recommendation, we found guidance was easier to find generally, but some ethics-related policies were not referenced, and organizational values had not been integrated. Another recommendation that we found that was in process was to update ethics-related policies to ensure they cover all employees and provide consistent definitions and instructions. This was another area we saw significant improvement, but there was at least one policy that had been partially replaced, and we had a difficult time determining if the remainder of that policy was still in effect. In addition, when we identified another area of concern in this area related to the risk of potential conflicts of interest for grants and contracts. The hybrid remote environment changed some processes. As a result, it was more difficult to determine if the conflict of interest disclosure policy was followed when we reviewed the documentation over the last 3 years. Another recommendation that was in process was to establish guidance for using Safe Harbor, which is a process that the Oregon Secretary of State office provides for vetting election-related materials to make sure that they are considered neutral and are in line with election law. Senior leadership did provide guidance to staff. However, the Safe Harbor process in the Secretary of State's office changed in 2022, which may require additional guidance to help figure out how to meet those new requirements at the state level. The final recommendation that we found that was in process was to remind employees of ethical expectations periodically through agency-wide communication and events. As you might expect, most of the internal communication in the last 3 years has focused on health and safety risks, which we found appropriate. And we did find some good communication around ethical requirements around elections time. However, we'd like to see increased communication around other ethical expectations in the future. I'm going to move on to the 2 recommendations that were in the management letter. The follow-up audit found that 2 recommendations in the management letter were related to lobbyist registrations were not implemented. The first recommendation was to strengthen controls to ensure registrations were kept up to date. The follow-up audit found that requirements in Metro Code were not well understood by those involved in the process. Information on Metro's website was inconsistent with the requirements listed in Metro Code. As a result, some lobbyists may not be registered because they think the requirements only apply to their time lobbying Metro Council. We reviewed the information provided by lobbyists when they registered as part of this audit. In most cases, the information posted online was different from what was provided. Metro did not list 2 registered lobbyists on its website, which meant that the online information was incomplete. Another registered lobbyist was associated with only one of their listed employers. In addition, most lobbyist interests online did not match what they had provided. That meant that the information online was not accurate. The second recommendation was to clearly assign responsibilities. The follow-up audit found that responsibilities were not clearly assigned. Employees contacted registered lobbyists when their registrations expired, but it was unclear who was responsible for determining if anyone else needed to register. As a result, there was no effort to identify new lobbyists since February 2020. In 2019, 2020, and 2021, management stated that an employee would work with the Metro Council office and Metro officials to review meetings with external entities on a quarterly basis. We found that those quarterly reviews had not occurred between September 19 and September 22. I want to thank the COO, Metro Attorney, General Manager of Visitor Venues, both of Metro's Deputy Chief Operating Officers, and the Human Resources Director for their assistance during the audit. I would also like to thank all the employees who were involved in the audit, and I'd also like to thank Simone Reddy and Rosalie Roberts who worked on this audit. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have for me, or we can wait until management has a chance to respond.
Thank you, Auditor. Why don't we get the response and then we can have a discussion. Thank you. Andrew Scott is here as Deputy COO to give the response.
Great. Thank you, Council President. So I'm Andrew Scott, Deputy Chief Operating Officer. And thank you, Auditor Evans, for this follow-up. I'm going to separate my management response comments between our response to the audit findings and then the response to the management letter around lobbyist registrations. I do just want to reiterate that ethics and ethical behavior are key values here at Metro. They're key values for the executive leadership team at Metro as well, and we really do strive to always maintain high ethical standards and set that tone from the top every time we can. The original audit from 2019 really helped us to clarify areas where we can improve. Areas where we can improve how we talk about ethics, how we train our employees, and ensure that ethics are integrated into all of the laws and policies that Metro follows. In the follow-up audit, I am very pleased that the auditor found that we had successfully implemented the findings around providing that ethics training, ensuring that someone is responsible for analyzing the ethics-related trends and risks, and using that information to determine if any additional measures are needed, and also clarifying department roles around investigating ethical issues. And in addition, I'm pleased to see that, the auditor found we're continuing to make progress on the other aspects of the audit, specifically around making sure the Code of Ethics is integrated into our work, that our ethics-related policies are clear and consistent, that they cover all of our employees, and that we routinely remind employees of the ethical values and expectations that Metro has. One additional note, and the auditor mentions this in his audit, is around establishing guidance for using Safe Harbor. That is something that I think, as some of you may know, when we're putting out any materials, particularly during campaign season, it's important that we make sure those campaign materials are factual and neutral and not political in any way. The Secretary of State's office in the past has provided Safe Harbor, and we can take our materials to them, they review them, and they either say, no, you need to make some changes, or yes, this is fine, and once it's fine, that Safe Harbor has been received. And one of the things that Chief Operating Officer Madrigal said very clearly is we want to make sure that we are finding Safe Harbor for all those things. The Secretary of State's office changed the way they do that review recently, and as part of that now, if we've submitted something to them once and we've made some small changes and tweaks and submitted to them again, they've essentially said they're not going to review it again. The problem that causes for us is that we either have to revert back to something that was previously done, or take the risk of putting something out there. I wanted to continue working with the Secretary of State's office on this. What they've done in the past is very helpful. I understand they've got some workload issues as well, which I think is one of the reasons for the changes. But it does mean that guidance we've given to always receive Safe Harbor, we need to go back and sort of rethink whether that's possible. Because again, if we can't get it for a specific thing, then we're making the determination as to whether it's close enough to what was found before. So that is a little bit of a change. We're going to continue to work with them on what that process looks like. But we do, as a general principle, continue to seek that review, and we'll continue to do so every time. Switching now on to the management letter around lobbyist registrations. And, you know, in addition to the items that were in the ethics audit, the auditor did issue a management letter in 2019, along with some follow-ups regarding weaknesses in our process around lobbyist registration and reporting. We have, at the staff level, strived to improve our compliance with Metro Code on lobbyist registrations, but I want to be blunt, we haven't made the progress on the issue that we should have. Some of this is due to COVID-related workflow interruptions, some is due to staffing changes in key positions, but ultimately, we have the responsibility to make improvements in how we do this work to ensure that we're implementing best practices and complying with Metro Code. And again, this follow-up, is helpful in terms of making us sort of take a step back and say, okay, what are the things we need to do to make sure we are meeting those goals and doing what we need to be doing? And so to that end, here are some of the actions that we are taking as a result of this. You all know, responsibility for registering lies solely with the lobbyist, but we are going to continue to proactively contact people who may be required to register, who may not know that, and making sure that we're posting those registrations that we are receiving publicly. We're going to perform an annual audit of the Metro Lobbyist webpage every January to review any expired registrations, and again, contacting people if they have expired to make sure that they are aware of that. One of the things we're going to add is a quarterly review of the counselor external meetings list, and consult with some of your policy advisors and other council staff every quarter to make sure that we're identifying people who, again, may be meeting or nearing that threshold for reporting, and proactively contacting them so that they're aware. And we want to make sure to clarify language on the registration page regarding what type of lobbying qualifies. I think as the auditor pointed out, the language that was there made it sound like maybe just lobbying of Metro Council, but it's actually lobbying of Metro Council or executive officials in the organization, all counts under Metro Code. And then finally, just administratively, we are adding those lobbyist registration duties to our GAPD coordinator position description, just to make it very, very clear that that position, which has been responsible, but again, we've had a little bit of turnover there, just to make it very clear that that is part of the duties of that position. We hope these changes do ensure more consistent and effective implementation of this particular provision of Metro Code. And again, I thank the auditor for his repeated focus on that issue. And overall, I'll end by thanking the auditor for the follow-up audit on this, for the focus on ethics as part of our organizational culture. Again, it's very important to all of us, and I know it's important to council as well. And we look forward to making these changes moving forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Auditor Evans or for Mr. Scott? Yes, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thanks so much. I appreciate the breadth of what fell under this review and update on the ethics audit. I do think that it's important to separate out the issues that are involved with the lobbying and the lobbying response from everything else where our agency has really stepped forward and is doing a lot, not only around ethics, but around transparency of those ethics. Regarding the lobbying, I am wondering if when we post our new guidance, if we will also be posting guidance around the public officials that work on Metro committees. So when we have impaneled core, when we have impaneled oversight committees, those folks are public officials, and if we can include explicit instruction around those public officials. Obviously, JPAC, everybody sitting at that table already falls into lobbying code under their originating jurisdiction, but it might be interesting to think about how that applies to MPAC as well. I guess I also have a second question. With this audit, it is dated this month, but obviously the work was done months ago based on the names at the top. So I'm wondering if any progress has been made since this work was completed within the past 3 or 4 months.
Specifically on lobbyist registrations or some of the other
On
pieces?
the lobbyist registration.
Yeah, on the lobbyist, yes. So we have been working with both GAPD and council staff to begin to implement, and I believe my understanding is we have done at least one of those quarterly reviews. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm getting a nod from Ina. So I think we have started that process. And again, we're going to be trying to codify and document those things as well.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilor Huang.
Great. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Andrew, and Auditor. Sorry. Yeah, thank you again. And I had two questions and an observation. I guess my first question is, like, what are the codified or legal repercussions of not having registered lobbyists or having folks register? Like, what responsibility do we have, as an agency, in that? And then, you mentioned the lobbyist register for Metro page, and I just kind of glanced through it, and there's only one registered lobbyist that's up to date on our website. Everyone else is expired. Is that something that we update regularly, and then we would reach out to folks that are expired and have them re-register? Just because if I look at this page, it seems pretty alarming to me.
I'm gonna defer to our Metro attorney on the first question. On the second, that is something that every January we do to go back to review those registrations to make sure they are up to date. And I haven't looked at the webpage recently, but again.
Great.
So yes, I believe we're working with those folks to get them
So
up to
those
date.
folks would have to refill the paperwork and we would update the website, but that hasn't happened yet for this year.
Ina, would you like to come up and give a little more detail?
Ina, please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
President Peterson, councilors, nice to see you. My name is Ina Zucker. I'm the program director in the council office. I've been working with government affairs staff a little bit to clean up some of the issues that the auditor recognized. One of the things that the current GAPD coordinator is doing is contacting lobbyists right now, the ones that are expired on the webpage. It's been a little unclear in the past about odd-numbered years. If you register after July, there's a lot of language that I think has been misunderstood and could be clarified in the plain English way. So we're working on that in terms of the instructions on the page. And Ashley, who is the current GAPD coordinator, is contacting lobbyists right now to make sure that they know to re-register if their registration has expired.
Great, thank you.
Does that include basically heads-up letters to, those lobbying firms throughout the region, the state that we know of as well?
President Peterson, we do have sort of a list of folks who are frequent visitors to Metro to visit you all, and also some department directors and others who have decision-making responsibilities. So we work really hard actually to identify those folks ahead of time, even if they haven't registered, just because it's still a bit of an unknown provision, the lobbyist registration piece.
Thank you. Into the first question.
Yes, so as I understood the first question, Councilor Huang, was what are sort of our legal responsibilities in this area? This is a Metro adopted code provision. So it's something which Metro Council could seek to clarify and change. You sort of have, I would say, broad legislative authority in this area. I believe our provisions of the code were probably adopted in the late 1990s, early 2000s. A lot of local governments were trying to seek more transparency. So you will see the city of Portland has their own lobbying registration requirements, for example, and it's not uncommon to have with other local governments. But it is an area where I would say you do have legislative purview, which means that the repercussions for this arena is really your enforcement. I'm not trying to downplay it, but we don't have real legal risk here. It is, I will emphasize, a responsibility of lobbyists. So it's the enforcement is, or the responsibility is really on those lobbyists to understand the rules and to register. Of course, what Mr. Scott and Ms. Zucker just spoke to are really the ways in which Metro should and is ensuring that better information is getting out, more contact is getting out, so that compliance will be more likely and also more, I guess, transparent on our website as well.
And do individuals who lobby and don't register, do they have personal legal risk?
There are enforcement provisions that we can take under our code, just sort of generally, but I mean, our first step has been, and I think we have, couple of examples where most of the time when we contact someone, they seek clarification as to whether or not they're actually required to register, and then they follow up with that registration. So we don't have people who I would say have really sought to evade our lobbyist requirements. That hasn't been our experience to date, although, probably more thorough record keeping and follow-up would bring those cases to light if there were any, but that has not been our experience.
Great. Any other?
Counselor Wong, if I could add something, sorry, this is Auditor Evans.
Sorry, Auditor.
Speaking from the heavens, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I just forget.
Yeah, part of the reason why I wanted to be there in person. But I guess I want to provide a little additional context because it's relatively shocking to me that the online registrations are now out of date again. If I can provide some additional context, going back to the history of my involvement with this issue, I first notified the COO and Metro attorney about out-of-date lobbyist registrations, the exact same situation that you just pointed out, in 2015. I did that verbally. I followed up in a written email several months later when I hadn't heard a response. That work was then put on hold, and I trusted that there was going to be some response to that. When we saw that it hadn't happened, we started the management letter in 2019. And in every situation, we've been told that there is a process and an assignment, and we have not seen follow through almost any step along the way. And so I would really encourage you to think about providing some direction to ensure that this pattern doesn't happen. We're talking about 8 years of the same pattern over and over and over again.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'll just look at our COO for follow-up on this. I think that obviously we're getting closer. I think what I've heard is that there has been follow-up already in terms of GAPD. The question is, how do we routinize it? And how do we make sure that since a lot of this is on the lobbyists to register and the lobbyists to follow this, we can only do so much. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Like we can't take all of the responsibility, but we certainly could do more. What can we do to follow up?
Thank you, President Peterson and counselors. I think, it's an excellent question. I think, none of us want to be in a position where we're saying, we're sorry that this hasn't happened for many years. And so, I won't even attempt to, go there. I think, the key in the past has been that there has, it seems to me, and again, before my time, before Andrew's time, that the responsibility was given to someone, but it wasn't, followed up on. It gets lost in the mix. And so I think what you say, getting things routinized is the key. So that while it is the lobbyist's responsibility, we are nudging where we know people are out of date and need to move forward and update their registrations. I do think we probably want to come back to council to talk about the code itself and how to clarify it and make it more accessible and understandable, so that that piece is clear too. But that's, I think, a different conversation. I think first we just need to make sure that our process, that there's checks and balances in the process, and I believe that Anna and Andrew have a solid plan for that.
Great. Thanks. Well, I think the follow-up in the next 3 months would probably be helpful, just to understand how much progress has been made, and then we can go from there. How does that sound?
Madam President?
Yes, Counselor.
Thank you. Thank you for that admission, Ms. Madrigal. Thanks, Auditor Evans, for the report. As I listen to this conversation and the application of the code puts this onus on the lobbyists, seems to raise a basic question about whether we shouldn't revisit the code, because it is us as an institution that holds this value and aims for this ethical behavior. And so the onus should at a minimum be equally shared and maybe even tilt a little more toward us Metro, and certainly us as electeds. And not having been here when the code was established or amended, I'm speaking mostly from experience with legislative rules and impositions regarding lobbying. And legislators do have some responsibility themselves. I don't know if anyone consulted that as a resource, but it might be a resource to look at as we move forward about how to balance that responsibility.
Why don't we also ask for any suggested code amendments, the plain language, the idea of where, just a review of the liability, I'll just broadly say the responsibility. I think what's interesting about Metro, and we can certainly look at the state, but when you get an entire book from the state, and on here we've got maybe a dozen, because we don't have that many actual lobbyists that come talk to us. There's a lot of constituents, but I think we should look at the state, but that is a much bigger, broader, right, base of it's a different ecosystem. And so I would love to see the difference between that and ours and understand where the responsibility falls at the state as well, and compare that to ours. But it's interesting to, go on our site and see 12. Are there more? We don't know. But we should really think about that.
And Madam President, you raise a good question about the scope of what is considered lobbying activity.
Yeah.
And the state, I'm not sure I'm going to get it exactly, but it's something on the order of 25 hours a quarter, which could very well be a volunteer constituent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fair question to ask whether we want that level of granularity. But candidly, 12 seems to be too small. That would mean the 7 of us each talking to 2 people, which seems too narrow.
So let's take a look at that and see if we can get some suggestions.
Just to clarify, and Metro Attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, but this applies to people being paid to lobby more than 5 hours a quarter. And so it does exclude folks who are, constituents who are coming in or people who are not paid, to be doing that. So it is more limited, I think, intentionally so. And so that's why, the 12, I think it's a great question. We do try and look, I do want to continue to reiterate, it's the lobbyist responsibility. I think, Councilor Nolan, to your point, one of the reasons why we're doing the quarterly review of calendars is to, again, do our due diligence to make sure that if we see that someone who, we think or know has been paid and has met with 3 or 4 counselors, you may not know that those meetings have happened. And if we do this review centrally, we can catch some of those and, again, prompt that person to do the lobbyist registration that they should hopefully be doing.
If I might just ask a clarifying question, Madam President. Thanks for that. Does our code, you mentioned that it includes only people who are paid to do that. Does it encompass only people who are paid to lobby? Or does it include people who have, because of their profession or their investments, a vested interest in decisions that are made either by our staff or by the electeds? And maybe I should be looking over here, Madam Metro Attorney.
to look in my direction. So one of the areas that we do differ actually from the state lobbying requirements is that volunteer lobbyists. So I will use League of Women Voters maybe as an example. So my understanding of the state lobbying requirements is that a volunteer who's lobbying on behalf of an organization, even if unpaid, does need to register in the state system. Metro does not require a volunteer lobbyist to register for as a lobbyist under our code. That's exempted. So we look at those folks who are on staff in lobbying or who are paid as contract lobbyists. Those are the people who really come under Metro's code. So there's a slight difference there. We could examine the reasons for that difference. And again, this is an area where Metro Council has, sort of legislative authority and purview to decide if you wanted to make those adjustments. But it's based, as Mr. Scott said, any person, any lobbyist who lobbies for more than 5 hours needs to register under the Metro Code.
Madam President, she's raised another question, and I sense your desire to move forward, but this raises a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, if the 7 council members each talk with a person whose title is lobbyist from a business or a contractor whose clients have interests before Metro, that needs to be reported.
Yes.
But what if we talk to another management or executive level position in that company? Or what if we talk to someone who is volunteering to represent a professional association that their company or they themselves are a member of?
So, Councilor Nolan, with respect to the second sort of scenario, someone who is employee and is seeking to influence an outcome or a decision of Metro Council or Metro executives, as Mr. Scott said, that person would also need to register as a lobbyist. Someone who your final scenario is a little bit more fact specific, and I'll keep it simple here. Generally speaking, someone who is volunteering. So if I'll use my League of Women Voters example again. If a volunteer lobbyist for the League of Women Voters were to come meet with counselors and Metro executives for a total of 8 hours, therefore exceeding the 5-hour threshold, under Metro's rules, as I interpret it, that person would not need to register as a lobbyist because they are not being remunerated for that role. And they're not an employee.
What if
they're volunteer.
the League of Women Voters is a little bit inept of an example? What if it is a professional association whose corporate members do business with Metro, but they are not paid to lobby, they are volunteering to have a conversation with department heads or elected leaders here?
Councilor Nolan, I'm going to follow up with you on that
Okay.
question because I think it's fact specific enough. It is a rather lengthy section of our code and it pretty much very intertwined in terms of the definition of lobbying and who's doing it and for what purpose. I'm happy to follow up. I'm happy to report out to all of council on that hypothetical, but I don't think I'm going to provide a thorough answer here.
What I was going to suggest is that we just follow up with a quick fact sheet of where we're at for the council and just come back with a report, a verbal report in 3 months of what has actually taken place in terms of what you've learned with all this outreach and how it's going. And then maybe we can go from there if that's good with the council. I don't want to get too deep into this today, but I do think that some follow-up is needed from what we've heard. Okay,
And
Councilor
Council
Lewis had a
President Peterson,
question.
If I could.
Just
weigh in.
just a minute, Auditor. Councilor Lewis, and I'll come back to you, Auditor.
Sure, I was gonna hope for some follow-up as well. I am hearing today that there's responsibilities that lie in council office and there are responsibilities that lie in GAPD. And I don't want this to continue to be somewhere in between those two shops. I would like for us in 3 months to know who does what or which shop is fully responsible for this. My hope is that there's clarity and it does not continue to get lost. Thank you.
Agreed. Okay. With that, thank you. Auditor, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just one last thing, thanks for the time. Just on that last question around the legal interpretation, specifically around compensation, it's a question that I've asked repeatedly, and I've formally asked the Metro Attorney's Office to issue a formal legal opinion about those questions. And so the intent of that is to clarify this and have that on record so that any future questions can be referred back to an existing legal opinion. So that may help with the questions that are being raised here and also the clarity moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and thank you to staff for following up and continue to move forward. So we'll see you back here and look forward to more discussion. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We will move on to our consent agenda. Today's consent agenda consists of one item, resolution number 23-5315, for the purpose of amending the 2021-24 MTIP to ensure previously approved funding is available to support planning activities in the SFY 2024 Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP. Do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilor Simpson. Do I have a second?
Second.
I'll pick. Councilor Nolan seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It passes. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to resolution number 23-5314 for the purpose of amending the Affordable Housing Bond Work Plan to allocate bond funds for Metro administrative costs. We have Metro's Deputy Director of Housing, Liam Frost, here, and other staff that we can introduce on this issue. Liam, welcome.
Thank you very much, Council President. Good morning, councillors. It's great to be in front of you today. It's my first time in front of council, and thankfully I'm only introducing this item. My name is Liam Frost, Assistant Director of the Housing Department. I use he, him, his pronouns. And we are here before you this morning to request an amendment to the Affordable Housing Bond Work Plan to allocate funding towards some administrative costs. Here to join me this morning are Rachel Lembo, Finance Manager, and Emily Lieb, Manager of our Affordable Housing team. Take it away, Emily.
All right. Good morning, Metro Council President and councilors. We have a brief slide presentation for you today to walk you through this amendment.
Have we regained Zoom audio? I've gotten reports from outside that we no longer have Zoom audio.
Yes,
Okay.
we're working on some technical difficulties. I don't think we have Zoom audio at the moment.
Okay, is that a legal issue?
The council can proceed.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead, Emily.
Great. And do we have the PowerPoint?
Yes, it should come up
okay.
on the screens in just a second
Oh,
here. I think
okay.
that they're also working to restore the audio, so it might take a second.
I'll dive right in. And so I'm jumping to the slide after the cover slide when we get it up. Wanted to just share some framing around this requested amendment to the work plan for the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond. The Affordable Housing Bond Program, as I think you're all aware, is on track to exceed our production goals, and we expect all of the remaining funds to be committed by 2024, and all of the projects in our pipeline to break ground by 2026. We'll be coming back to the council in June with our annual report on the program, so are excited to celebrate progress with you then. Today, we are here to talk about the program administration needs, which have been a continued challenge throughout the program due to the 5% administrative cap that limits administrative funding through the bond. And that funding is shared between Metro and our 7 jurisdictional partners. So today we are coming to request an amendment to the allocation in the work plan to allocate $700,000 in unallocated bond funds to fill a gap in the FY 2024 budget. This will allow Metro to continue our administrative and oversight duties without requesting any financial support from the general fund in FY 24. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and there. So wanted to just share some context on the administrative needs of this program. Metro's work plan, which was approved by the council in 2019, lays out several expectations for Metro's role on oversight and accountability. So that includes reviewing an administrative review of every project at a concept and final stage, including financial analysis, quarterly or annual reporting, and we also produce quarterly reports to support our oversight committee, staffing and facilitation of the oversight committee, evaluation of outcomes for advancing racial equity, and then maintaining operational procedures and tools. And I will say that as a new program, these startup needs have been significant. We are still building out some of the pieces of our operational procedures, the methodology, particularly the work around evaluating outcomes for advancing racial equity. Some of those pieces are still in development. Operating the program or operating the aircraft while building it at the same time is the analogy we often use. Next slide, please. And in addition to those operational needs, there also have been a number of emerging opportunities, challenges, and risks that have required our team's attention to address. A lot of these respond to some of the shifts we have seen in the landscape since the bond was passed in 2018. We've talked a lot in the past year about the shifting financial landscape, private activity bond constraints at the state level, rapidly rising costs and interest rates, and the need for regional coordination with our jurisdictional partners and with the state to respond to those needs. The passage of the SHS funding measure in 2020 created a new opportunity for aligning and integrating our bond funds with those additional investments in supportive services to expand permanent supportive housing. And responding to the council direction and oversight direction to support the integration and alignment of those programs. Another example is the AC policy that was adopted and the additional funding allocated to support the inclusion of air conditioning in all the units. Next slide, please. And before I pass it over to Rachel to walk you through the numbers, I just wanted to share a little context on the administrative funding cap. The cap was established in 2018 as part of the measure referred to voters. When it was passed, adopted by the council, and I think, I don't know that any of you were here at that time, it was with a general recognition of the impact the cap would likely have on Metro's general fund and the general fund of our jurisdictional partners. To date, Metro has not, or the program has, Metro's administrative needs have not relied on any general fund support so far. The FY 19 to 20 budget for the program did include an allocation of $500,000 in general fund, but that was later returned to the general fund in the spring of 2020 to mitigate some of the early impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I mentioned on the last slide, that initial allocation didn't anticipate the full scope of Metro's role. We've been doing some work to look forward at what our remaining needs and risks are and want to come back to the council this fall with a broader recommendation around what we expect our needs to be for the remainder of implementation. But for today, we are just looking for action or recommending action to fill our unmet FY24 needs with bond funds, which is an action you can take by amending the work plan. And I will pass it over to Rachel to kind of walk you through the numbers.
Thanks, Emily. Next slide, please. Good morning, Council President Peterson and Council. I am Rachel Lembo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Finance Manager for Planning, Development, Research, and Housing Departments. The slide up here has some numbers in it to give you some context about this proposal. This includes an overview of the amounts that were available in the work plan adopted in 2019, as well as the amounts available as of December 2022. As you can see, the 2019 work plan included $6.5 million in set-aside admin to be allocated in the future. That's in the line that says unallocated. As of December 22, this program now has additional unallocated admin. That's from two sources. One is interest earnings on the bond proceeds. We can use up to 5% of those interest earnings for admin costs. So it's 1.7 million as of December. In addition, the Portland Housing Bureau is not using any Metro bond funds for their admin. They are only using Metro bond funds for direct project costs. And as a result, that freed up 4.4 million of that admin funding within that 5% cap. So you can see that the total unallocated admin is currently 12.7 million. The row right below that shows that the total admin funding for this program is 34.4 million, which is 5% of the total bond funding shown at the top. And I just want to give a little bit more context to what Emily was just describing and also clarify for you why we're here today with this proposal. So as Emily mentioned, up until this point, Metro's admin costs have been covered entirely by the admin funding allocated in the 2019 work plan. As we started to put together the budget for next fiscal year, FY 23-24, we recognized that we would be in that fiscal year exceeding that original allocation by approximately $700,000. Because we have the 12.7 million in currently unallocated admin funding, the proposal today is to allocate 700,000 of that to Metro for next fiscal year. That would allow us to continue the admin work that Emily just described without any general fund allocation. That will leave $12 million in that unallocated bucket. Over the next year, we'll be looking at the needs both of Metro and our partner jurisdictions and be coming back to council with a proposal of how to allocate that remaining 12 million. And that concludes our presentation, but Emily and I are happy to take any questions you have.
Councilors, any questions? Yes, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much, and thank you for that very clear chart to help us understand what we're talking about. We're talking about working within what is the administrative bucket. 5% is incredibly modest, and we were ambitious to say we were going to stay at or below, particularly combining all 7 jurisdictional partners that do this work. How do our jurisdictional partners feel about this? Because in going into that bucket, there's less in the bucket for them. Have we heard? Have we engaged? Are we first in line, or are we, kind of at the back of the line here?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have been in ongoing conversations with our partners about the challenges of the administrative cap. Part of why we are coming with this action today and not recommending broader action on the remaining funds is because we need more time to have a more robust conversation with our partners about the risks and the challenges. As we've seen with the original allocation, dividing that up 7 ways does not go very far, and the nuances of Portland covering their admin in different ways, I think there's some complexity there. We need more time to have that conversation with partners and understand what would the most effective, what would best support all of our jurisdictional needs. So that is the work that those are the conversations we want to have this year and come back to you in the fall.
Great, thank you. I guess I look at that bucket as something that we have to be in partnership with, because when they're gone, they're gone. And there's plenty of work still ahead, even though on our end, we see kind of the path of how the rest of the bond expenditure is gonna go. So I think we're at a right time to make the investment, make sure we can complete our work. But I am just nervous that those funds have to be stretched really thin with other jurisdictional partners, even if not City of Portland.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Councilor Huang, then Nolan.
Great, thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the staff for putting this together. I know as well as anyone how important administrative dollars are, but I just had a question on kind of the process. So what I'm understanding is, the ask is to move $700,000 to admin, and then you'll come back and allocate it later this fall. So I guess my question is, I understand there's significantly more need, but like, we're being asked to move money without knowing exactly where it would go as of this moment. So how do we know that the 700,000 is enough? And that will, meet the administrative needs of this program? Like, I guess overall the question is, where is this $700,000 amount coming from if you haven't fully programmed it out yet?
Sure, I'll take that if that's good with you. So on the table of that last slide, so basically we're looking at moving it from, it's currently in let's call it a bucket that has 12.7 million that is unallocated. We're looking to allocate 700,000 of that to Metro. So there's basically Metro and our 7 partner jurisdictions who have these admin needs. So we're looking to move that specifically for Metro to spend. And that amount is based on the admin work that Emily described and our current estimates of the cost of that work through June of 2024. So through next budget year. Basically, we've looked at how much have we spent up through last year, how much do we think we're going to spend through the end of next year, or excuse me, this year, and then through the end of next year, and we had a gap of 700,000. So before next year's budget comes to you, which will happen pretty soon, we wanted to bring this proposal forward so that if we can cover that gap with this allocation of the work plan, it's fully funded in the budget that's presented to you. That does certainly mean then Metro has no admin funding for FY25 or the remaining years of the bond. And so that's where that $12 million that would remain in that unallocated bucket, we would be planning out how much does Metro need, how much do our partner jurisdictions need, and that's where we would be doing that deeper dive and working with those partner jurisdictions to bring back a more in-depth proposal for you for the remaining 12 million.
So the 700,000 is based on current projections that.
The needs for FY24.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Nolan.
Thank you, Madam President. A couple of questions. Could we bring that last slide up? A general comment. I appreciate you bringing this issue forward, but it seems like we are being brought in to make a decision at a point after decisions have already made that limit our options. That is, commitments have been made for the activities and services in the current fiscal year, and now we're being asked to pay for them or approve payment for them. If I'm misunderstanding that, I'd appreciate hearing that. But to the specific details of this, what the 14,361 in the work plan is less than 300,000 less than the 14,631 in the December 22. So I'd like to have an explanation of the $400,000 difference between what that gap is and what you are asking for today. I'd also like clarification on where either the 14,631 or the additional 700,000 you're talking about would put Metro as a percentage of total bond proceeds, which we see have increased beyond initial projection.
Great, thank you for those questions. So to your first question, this $700,000 gap is in next fiscal year, and that budget hasn't been proposed yet. So the bond program has sufficient admin funding under the 2019 work plan for the work that's happening right now in this fiscal year. There are options for next year. So to be very clear about what those options are, One option is what staff is recommending, which is to allocate the $700,000 to cover the budget as we currently have it developed. Another option would be to not allocate that and tell staff you want us to work with the COO and look maybe for some general fund allocation. So you want to continue admin work as we've been doing it, but you don't want to use the bond admin funding. And then another option would be to say you want us to look for ways to trim down our admin costs, and we would change the admin work we're doing. So potentially that would be able to either eliminate or reduce that $700,000 gap. All of those are on the table because we're talking about next fiscal year. So we haven't started that yet. Your second question is, it looks like those numbers are transposed. They should not have changed between the December 2019 work plan and the December 2022. So they should be exactly the same. They haven't changed. The 3 and the 6 got switched, so that was a typo. So to be very clear, that has not changed. Metro's admin allocation has not changed from 2019. That as of December 22 is showing what it is right now. The proposal would move $700,000 from that unallocated row up into the Metro allocation row, but that's not shown in that table.
And where would that then put the allocated to Metro row? I can ask my little
calculator
system here to tell me, but maybe you've already calculated it, which I would hope.
That's why I don't go anywhere without my computer. So that would bring Metro's allocation to just over 15 million, which as a percentage of the total bond funds is about 2.2%.
So then if I might follow up on that, how are we going to live for the remainder of the bond on the remaining 2.2% that would be available to Metro for admin?
So the remaining of the bond, we would then have $12 million still in that unallocated. We would figure out at this point, we can estimate, I think, pretty accurately what our needs are going to be through the end of the bond. We're now at a point where we really see the end of this program. So we would estimate out our admin cost needs.
Which is when?
The end of the program?
Yes.
Well, I mean, at this point, and Emily, jump in if I'm wrong, but we do think, I believe, that construction on all of the projects will start by 2026.
Yeah, construction by 2026. That means construction's wrapping up by 28. And then there's post-completion reporting and there's evaluation of that. So there's a ramp up at the beginning, there's a ramp down at the end where there is outcomes evaluation that we have committed to in the work plan.
So we would be looking at that, and then we'd be looking for information from our partner jurisdictions about their needs. I will be totally honest that $12 million is probably not going to be enough to cover our remaining admin needs, FY25 and beyond, and our partners' admin needs. But we would come up to you with a proposal of how we're going to allocate that, and then there would be a discussion of if Metro isn't fully funded through this, what are the needs that we would be requesting of the general fund.
And I'll wrap up by saying that I align myself with the comments that Councilor Lewis made, certainly about partnership. I think, for my perspective, the most important partnership, though, is with the voters who approved a plan that limited Metro's admin funding to 5%. And what I am hearing said is, you don't think that's going to be adequate, and I think we ought to be much more focused now on making sure we can deliver what we promised the voters with what they agreed we should spend. I'm also uncomfortable generally that this is coming up as a pretty significant budget issue outside of the context of our 23-24 budget deliberations, and I might ask the COO why we would be deliberating on this when within the next 2 months we'll be having discussions about budgets generally. I'm not a fan of piecemeal budgeting.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan, President Peterson, and councilors. So a couple of things. My understanding is that the 5% cap was a known entity going into the bond that we will not spend more than 5% of the bond on administration. So if it costs us more to administer the program than 5%, we will be subsidizing it somehow. Or we will be deciding not to do an evaluation, we will cut back on costs. So there is no scenario in which I would recommend or the team would recommend that we exceed 5% of the bond and break our promise to the voters. I just want to be very clear about that. The second thing is that this does feel out of order. However, my understanding is that the work plan has to be approved by council, and so in order for budget documents, in order for us to make any change or reflected change in the proposed budget, the work plan has to be changed. If council elects not to change the work plan, then, that's okay. We will factor in the assumptions of the 2019 work plan into the proposed budget. So maybe I'll stop there.
So if I may, just kind of talk through this out loud. This would be the approval to change the work plan, but there still needs to be allocation within the budget. I guess what I'm feeling and hearing myself and I think from the council is the discontinuity between those two, because we don't actually have another slide. I think there's a whole nother slide that's kind of missing from this conversation in terms of ramifications. What does it mean? And I don't want to hold back on moving forward, but I do feel like we need to come back and have that next conversation of what the scenarios and the potential impacts are down the line so that we understand, yes, we've given the opportunity to go for the $700,000 in the budget, but we have not actually approved it yet. And I think before that approval takes place in the budget, we need some questions answered in terms of what are the impacts down the road and what are the different scenarios that you mentioned that still need to be discussed, but before the budget is passed. So however we can get those questions answered, does that give a line forward for the council? Any specific questions for the record that you would want answered between now and then, besides what's been put on the record? Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. I would like clarity on I think you've correctly identified three options. There may be nuances or shadings around those, but that's basically it. I would like some clarification about what we could do if the council says no on the $700,000. And I don't want a Washington Monument response. I want to know seriously if that's the circumstance, because we have accountability for future general fund draws that going down this path might necessitate. I want to know that we're stepping into that box before we step into it. I also am very interested in, I don't know if in the next week, this comes back a week from now for vote? Okay, oh, it's a resolution.
Yeah, it's today.
Well, I don't have enough information to vote in support of this today. That may not change other people's minds, but I don't have enough confidence that we are making a prudent decision on behalf of all of Metro's pledges and duties. But I do think we need to be given clarity on the implications, I think was a word used earlier today, of the decisions. And it's unfortunate that we don't have that this morning. I would prefer to wait until we have a chance to look at that information before we vote on it.
Marisa.
If I may, Councilor Nolan, we're happy to come back with more information. That's, no problem at all. One thing I want to say say out loud, just for your contemplation, is these funds that we're talking about allocating are extremely restricted. So they can only be spent for one purpose. Versus general fund. So as you're which is discretionary, Metro has a very small general fund. So there's not going, I know exactly what you mean, Councilor Nolan, when you say Washington Monument. I don't like receiving those proposals either. But we do, just the facts of life here at Metro is that our general fund is very small, and that's the most flexible pot of funding that we have. So taking it out of the context of this conversation, I would almost always recommend using restricted funds for that restricted purpose and not backfilling with a more discretionary fund. So just something to think about. And then we, are happy to answer the specific questions that you all have. So just could I clarify the concern? So you would like to, as a council, have more understanding of the trade-offs associated with this 700 being allocated to Metro versus allocating it to other jurisdictions, maybe more information from the other jurisdictions about what their gaps are. Can you help me clarify?
Happily, if I may,
Yes.
Madam President. And thank you for that. As I look at a decision, I would like to know what activities wouldn't be done by our affordable housing team if the council chose not to appropriate the $700,000 that's asked, as I understand it, for next fiscal year. So this is why I'm having a hard time with the timing here. But I'd like to know what activities wouldn't be done. And I do not think you can just work harder. I recognize that when you don't have funds, positions aren't filled and work doesn't get done. So be as clear in a genuine way as possible. Secondly, I'm concerned into the future, and that is if less than halfway through the timeline of this program, we are exceeding our commitment to administer it with only 5% of the funds. I'm concerned that we get to a point, if we don't retract activities now, we may be in a position to have to retract a much bigger amount of auditing or other analysis or preparation for the next bond. And I don't want us to be in that position. Certainly, I want us to walk into it eyes wide open.
Absolutely.
I don't think, it's related to your comment.
Yes.
That we have a very limited general fund. And I don't want to put this council or another council in a position of having to appropriate funds from that limited general fund because we didn't face up to a need to change our management approach early enough that we didn't cause that problem in the future.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I think that you have all these answers. I just think that there's kind of just a next step question of both the 5% justification that we will still be within that 5%, just to clarify, that slide. And then there's also the slide of, as I see it in my head, of the next steps of what still needs to happen and kind of, how you think that's going to play out. And I don't know if that's just a reiteration of what Councilor Nolan said, but I think it's a pretty simple next step, but I think I would like to get clarification. So if we could continue this conversation, hold it over a week, Can we get that done within the week?
Certainly, I think, President, not to the substance of what can be done, sorry, procedurally, I was
Yes.
just jumping in. I apologize for maybe
Good,
putting
'cause-
myself at the front of the line. But procedurally, certainly with unanimous consent of council, this can just be carried over to your next week's agenda. If someone wants to make a motion to postpone to a date certain, you can, but I think just with a sort of a nod of the heads, if we want to carry this over procedurally to next week's agenda, we certainly can do so.
Madam President,
Yes.
councilors, I just want to check in with our staff here to see if 1 week is enough.
We don't have a meeting next week, so 2 weeks.
Correct.
Councilor Lewis, thank
2 weeks. You just got 2 weeks.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is a little more context around the 700,000 specifically and what would need to be scaled back if we didn't. Now, that has implications for the future, and so what I think is gonna be very challenging for us to bring back to the council by next week is that full conversation with our partners around what are the big picture risks? What would they wanna see?
I think it's acknowledgement
Yeah.
of those risks. I think
Okay.
that's what we're missing in
And
our
a roadmap
context.
of like what
You
our next
have-
steps are to
yeah.
have those conversations.
And
come back.
enumeration
Yeah.
of them, maybe with a
Yes.
dollar value.
Well, as far as we can get in 2 weeks.
Right.
Okay. We may
Yes.
not be able to get that far with our partners, but the understanding of the trade-offs and the risks as far as we can get in 2 weeks so that we understand the complexity of what you're dealing with and the timeline. And I don't think it's just the 700,000, I think it's that 12 million, right, is really the issue. If we're taking from that 12 million and putting it over here, what else is playing out in that pot? And what risks are we seeing as we move forward if we take that money out? So I think it's both the 700,000 and the total, and that we're staying underneath the cap. I think just the clarification of all that would be helpful. All right, do I see nodding heads of moving this 2 weeks forward?
You have a
Continuation?
couple questions, maybe. You have hands up.
Oh, I have hands up. Sorry, Counselor Lewis and then Counselor Gonzalez.
Sure, I'm happy to see this back in 2 weeks. I just have my hand up to really put in perspective that Metro had no base operations in housing. And yet, out of the 5%, we're still looking at 2.2%. So we're still coming in under half of the administration here where we're all in startup mode. And then our 7 jurisdictional partners all have that base. That is their bread and butter of what they do every day. So I do think we're still at the appropriate proportionality. I also think that compared to where we started with our work plan, we have evolved our program in response to the Oversight Committee, in particular asking really good and smart questions around workforce equity in actually the building and construction program. So we've added some evaluation since the work plan was adopted. And in order to continue to do that work, I am happy to support this going forward. So I know we'll hear more in 2 weeks, but I just have my hand up to advocate for that perspective of how we got here. And the work that our team is doing isn't, to use parlance we've been using, Washington Monument. It's core to who we are and how we build things at Metro. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Gonzalez.
Thanks, President Peterson. Just been observing the dialogue virtually here. But I appreciate Councilor Lewis's comments, and I just wanted to end with a general sense of support for the work that staff has presented. And, you know, for me, it's kind of bringing in some of that I guess, institutional knowledge that when the bond was passed and in the formation of the bond, you know, 5% is obviously something that we're adhering to, but there was an acknowledgement that, you know, we don't really have a baseline and we're going to have to build a lot and we're going to have to, it might be tough to meet that. And the questions around external subsidies and all that. But the work that staff has done to really hit the benchmarks that we have, I feel incredibly proud of that. And, you know, particularly with the overperformance, you know, air quotes, in terms of the units that we've been able to build with the bond allocations to our partners. I think that, just to wrap it up, you know, I think that, you know, this allocation to really help ramp up the last phase of construction and to add that extra bit of capacity for some of those aspirational goals that we set, and all of the things that we've learned to maximize the public benefit. I see that kind of coming through the extra capacity, but look forward to the what staff brings back to us in 2 weeks to have further conversation. But I just wanted to express that. Thank you.
Short,
Oh,
there,
okay.
they are.
Okay.
We need
never
a
mind.
magic wand and you waved one.
I need gold confetti. I need a gold button. Great, now they're really loud. Okay. We will move on to our ordinances. Ordinance number 23-1490 for the purpose of annexing to the Metro District boundary approximately 6.58 acres located in Hillsborough to the west side of Southeast 67th Avenue, north of Southeast Generosa Street. Okay. I would like to ask our Metro Attorney, Carrie McLaren, to please read the procedural requirements for this portion of the meeting. Carrie.
Thank you, President Peterson, members of the council. My name is Carrie McLaren, Metro Attorney. A few procedural items before we get into the staff report. Because this annexation involves a land use application that requires a quasi-judicial hearing, there are some additional procedural requirements that must be addressed. First, council members must declare a conflict of interest or ex parte contact prior to the staff presentation. If a councilor has a conflict of interest, they are not allowed to participate in the council discussion or vote on that application. If a council has had an ex parte contact, they must declare the substance of it on the record, and it is subject to rebuttal. Discussions with Metro staff are not considered ex parte contacts. Councilors will be asked to declare any conflict of interest or an ex parte contact after I describe additional procedural requirements. For quasi-judicial hearings of this type, Oregon land use statutes provide the following required procedures. Under Section 3.09.070 of the Metro Code, this type of annexation into the Metro District boundary must be initiated by petition, which must be reviewed and acted on by the council following a public hearing. Public testimony at this hearing should only address the applicable approval criteria. The approval criteria are set forth in Section 3.09.070 of the Metro Code and are more specifically identified in the staff report, which is part of the packet of materials before the council today. The decision of the council is final, although it can be challenged by filing a notice of intent to appeal with a Land Use Board of Appeals within 21 days of the final decision. If a person fails to raise an issue in person during the hearing or by letter, or fails to provide sufficient evidence to allow the council to respond to an issue, that issue may not be the basis for an appeal to LUBA. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to give the council an opportunity to respond to the issues precludes an action for damages in circuit court under ORS 197.796. Just briefly, the hearing procedures. First, Metro staff will present a short staff report. The staff report will describe the proposal, identify the applicable approval criteria, and will summarize the staff recommendation. The applicant may then make a presentation in support of their application, and following that, any other persons in support of the application will be given an opportunity to speak. If any opponents of the application are here, they will then have the opportunity to speak, and finally, the applicant may rebut any testimony from opponents. Public testimony will then be closed, and after the record is closed by all parties, council members may discuss the request and ask questions of staff. A council vote will not be held until after the second reading. This hearing is part of the official record. In testimony, testifiers should speak specifically about this application and how the criteria relate to the request. Please submit a copy of any written testimony, and we will maintain that as part of the record in this case. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the presentation by our Associate Regional Planner, Glenn Hamburg. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Council President Peterson and councilors. I'm Glenn Hamburg, Associate Regional Planner with Planning, Development, and Research, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm here before you this morning with another ordinance for annexation to the Metro District. This ordinance, if adopted, would annex to the district about 6.5 acres located in Hillsborough. The subject property is on the west side of Southeast 67th Street and is in the adopted South Hillsborough plan area. The territory is already in the urban growth boundary, and since publishing your meeting packet, the city of Hillsborough has given public notice of a local hearing for annexation of the subject property into the city limits as well, and for rezoning of the subject property for urban residential development and for protection of some natural resource areas on it. Before that prospective urban residential development can occur, though, the property has to also be annexed into the Metro District, hence this application. The criteria, as the Metro Attorney mentioned, for annexations to the Metro District are in subsection 309070E of the Metro Code. And those criteria are as follows. 1, that the territory be in the urban growth boundary. 2, that the territory be subject to measures that prevent urbanization until the territory is either annexed to a city or to service districts that will provide the necessary urban services. And 3, the proposal be consistent with any applicable cooperative or urban services agreements adopted pursuant to ORS Chapter 195 and any concept plan. And so as the staff report explains, this application meets all of that criteria. The subject property was brought into the urban growth boundary in 2002 by Metro Ordinance 02969B. The property is currently in Washington County's land use jurisdiction and zoned by the county as FD20. That's sort of a holding zone that prevents urbanization of the property until it's annexed by a city. Moreover, the City of Hillsborough's comprehensive plan actually calls for annexation of the property as a prerequisite for city zoning and the provision of city services. And finally, urban residential development would be consistent with the already adopted South Hillsborough plan area. So the owners of the subject property have consented to this annexation, and we've published notice of this ordinance in the Oregonian, on site with a sign, and in notices that have been mailed to nearby property owners and to other interested parties. So far, we've received no comments either in favor or opposition to this proposal, and for all those reasons, staff recommends approval of the ordinance 23-1490. And of course, I can answer any questions you might have.
Councilors, any questions before we go to public hearing to staff?
Madam President, if I may, just for one quick question, just wanted to confirm, no counselor stepped forward and said that they had had any ex parte contacts. And so I just want to confirm that no one has any ex parte contacts to declare. Okay, seeing nodding heads, we can move forward to my next question, which is no one has any conflicts of interest to declare either on this application. Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. I'll turn it back over to you, Madam President.
No, much appreciated. All right, any questions for staff on this proposed annexation? With that, we will move on to our public hearing for ordinance number 23-1490. Connor, will you please describe to the audience our procedures for the public hearing?
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. So if anyone wishes to testify on ordinance number 23-1490, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage the timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now by hitting the raise hand button. If you're joining us in person, you can also sign up to speak by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing that up to me. So for those joining us virtually today, in order to allow you to turn on your cameras, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist. So I'll call your name, and you will see a message pop up asking you to accept that promotion. Once you accept it, you'll rejoin as a panelist where you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. As a reminder to everybody today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. President Peterson, we have had somebody sign up in advance today to testify on this. So for folks, we will first be taking testimony for those in support of the application. I see a couple of hands up. So if you would like to testify in support of the application, please keep your hand up. If you would like to testify in opposition, please lower your hand now. Okay, and I'll just give folks another couple seconds. We don't have any hands up for support, so I will now move on and now take testimony for those in opposition to the application. So please go ahead and hit that raise hand button. Thank you. Okay, so first up with the person who signed up in advance, we have Elijah Lessard. So Elijah, I'm going to go ahead and promote you up to a panelist. All right. Hi there, Elijah. You should be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. You'll have 3 minutes, and your time will begin when you begin speaking.
Hello, my name is Elijah Lessard. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a homeowner in the Rosedale Parks community, which directly abuts the proposed development. I am a homeowner on one of the homes that is actually directly abutting the proposed development, and my presentation material today is in regards to the third parameter of the qualifying terms for moving forward with the development in regards to it meeting the outline requirements by both the city of Hillsborough, but also being in line with other developments in the area. I would like to point out that this development encroaches upon the wetland water space far more than either the Reeds Crossing development does or any of the other developments that are immediately adjacent to the waterway that flows directly north of the Generosa and is through the middle of the Reedsdale Crossing development, which is directly east of the proposed property development. In addition to this, per the meeting that the developer had with the homeowners here in our community down at the Reserve Golf Course, he made it explicitly clear to us that he has no defined timeline for development, nor does he have any defined development plans for either individual homes on the property or the homes in the community subdivision as a whole, which leaves the inability to state that it meets any of the conformities of the Hillsborough requirements or any discernible ability to define the project as meeting the qualifications that the other homes and developments in the area were required to meet to. I have submitted multiple pictures of the property as it stands now. This is in regards to the development management responsibilities of the current property owner in regards to both council members and community members' assurance that he has got the ability and the resources to see through any defined development that he may or may not have, which has not been presented at this point in time. And I think that the pictures and the testimony from the community that the state of that property has been in such a case for over 3 years now clearly indicates that there is no historical evidence to have future expectations of the proposed developer to meet the guidelines of even the current standards of the area that he is in, albeit unincorporated land. And therefore, historical presentation not supporting any future expectations of he being able to meet or willingness to meet the development stage requirements by the city and as well by the county. I'd like all council members to please review the property pictures that were submitted to Connor Ayers earlier this morning. There are multiple burn pits on the property. The items that are seen in the yard have been there and are still there, and the landowner has made no attempts in any form or fashion to remediate any of this since retaking control of the property from the squatters, which he was successful at getting off the property about a month ago. And I believe my time is up.
Good job. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Yes, those additional materials were submitted shortly before this meeting, councilors, and will be distributed to you after. Okay, so next up we have John Q. Public. So John, I'm going to go ahead and promote you. All right. Hi there, John. You should be able to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. You'll have 3 minutes, and your time will begin when you begin speaking.
Hello, Council. Thank you for your time and consideration of the following statements. I prefer to remain anonymous as I am a resident of the area and a person of color who is cautious against retribution. I use he, his pronouns, and I worked for the state of Oregon for 8 years and currently work as a consultant in state governments around the country. The proposed annexation for the purposes of urbanization would be damaging to wildlife preservation, disruptive to community well-being, and denies homeowners adjacent to the property of a nature sanctuary. The area in question sits on a stream corridor and floodplain. The lot is surrounded on the north, east, and west by protected natural areas. This total area, including the lot in question, are teeming with wildlife and offer sanctuary to many species that contribute to the environmental balance of the local ecosystem. Furthermore, it provides a barrier for natural predators, such as coyotes, to remain in the area instead of preying on community members' pets and, or God forbid, our children. An annexation of the proposed lot for urbanization would raise indigenous flora and replace it with an artificial landscape, disrupting the natural flow between east-west ecological proliferation from Gordons Creek to Ettinger Reservoir. This would have negative down and upstream impacts that would cascade to the surrounding ecosystems. This was not adequately addressed in the findings section of the staff report generated by Hillsborough Community Development. The surrounding community is already undergoing massive change with the Reeds Crossing and Hillsborough developments in accordance with the Hillsborough 2035 plan. Urbanizing the proposed annexation would cause an unnecessary increase in the local carbon footprint and human traffic. There would be more traffic in the area that has a school, which would increase probability of injury to our children by motorists. The potential tax revenue that is generated by the lot development ought not outweigh the well-being of the landowning taxpayers already settled in the area. For these diverse set of neighbors, local well-being comes in the form of having a natural sanctuary next door to their residence and is what attracted many of the residents to this specific neighborhood. The lot in question currently provides oxygen through its flora and more pleasant scenery to the eyes than a row of spite houses would provide with this development. There are deer, squirrels, many types of birds, and even neighborhood gathered to who freely roam the area. Seeing them thrive, particularly at this time of year, gives hope as we are seeing their young proliferate in an otherwise urban landscape. By urbanizing this area, Metro will be liable for acquiescing the destruction of much life for the sake of minuscule profit. The applicant has already been found to have engaged in misconduct and false representation by a trial court in a previous land deal while seeking the maximum profit for their own financial gain. There's no guarantee that this applicant will not engage in similar conduct moving forward. While this may represent an ad hominem fallacy, it is still worth noting on the basis of the integrity of land developers that the city of Hillsborough, the county, and metro area are responsible for engaging, and this calls into question the applicant's integrity. I'm trying to see how much time I have left. Since ethics are important to the council and the citizen they represent, I call into question the ethics of the developer, and I oppose approving the annexation, the applicant's proposal, on principle that they clearly do not regard preserving the environment and sustaining the well-being of community members, as is evident in the aforementioned considerations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, I'll give anybody else in the audience who would like to testify just another second or two to hit that raise hand button. All right. With that, I don't see anybody new in the audience with their hand up. President Peterson.
So just to confirm, since we've had opponents of this in testimony, and I don't know if the applicant is actually online, certainly I don't see any applicant before us, but we do need to provide an opportunity for rebuttal, correct?
I'm going to ask Roger Alfred to come up and address the procedural questions. So Roger, did you hear the, okay, great.
Thank you.
Good morning, Council President and Councilors. Roger Alfred, Office of Metro Attorney. To your question, President Peterson, if the applicant is not here to provide rebuttal, the applicant's not here to provide rebuttal. So, I mean, I think we are fine moving forward with what you have in front of you.
So I just want to make sure if we could call out whether the applicant is actually virtually online and have them raise their hand in the next.
Yes, I don't, okay, I do see somebody, Mark Vukanovich has raised his hand. So Mark, I'll go ahead and promote you up. All right, Mark, you should be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself now.
And Mark, could you identify yourself as the applicant or working for the applicant?
I am the applicant, yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead if you would like to make a comment.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have any comments to make. I was a little surprised on a couple of the negative comments on some of our neighbors out there, and would say that I don't agree with a few of their comments 100%. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to go back and forth on integrity issues or anything else. I've got AKS Engineering and Planning Services. They've done a very good layout for this property. I bought this property several years ago, I think back in 2005. And we've been working pretty diligently trying to work together with our engineers and the city staff to come up with a plan that the city likes, that works for their transportation plans, that ties in the walking trails along Gordon Creek, et cetera, et cetera. So we spent a lot of time, a lot of energy working through this, and we just look forward to hopefully gaining Metro support on our annexation application.
Great, thank you, much appreciated. Of course, this is not a debate. We are taking testimony. Testifiers have already given testimony. There will be no further testimony after we close this out. But we have provided an opportunity for yes and an opportunity for no, and the applicant's response. Looking at our attorneys, may I close the public comment period now for this period?
Yes, Madam President, you may close the
That's why I said what I said, counselors. That person who testified already has asked to testify again. This is not a debate, it's actual testimony. So I just want to make sure. Now, that's why I'm asking.
Yes, so Madam President, each person, we called for the folks who were in opposition to the application. We called for testimony for those in favor of the application. We also received an applicant's rebuttal. I think now is an appropriate time where you could close the public hearing, and we would then go on to our second. No decision is going to be made today. Council would be making their decision at the second reading in 2 weeks.
However, we could ask staff questions after we close out the
You may certainly ask staff questions after you close the public hearing.
Okay, Councilor Lewis, you had an issue?
I respect your gavel, but I just want to flag that Melissa Slotmaker, I don't believe I've heard from yet.
Connor just let me know that that is a new person that just raised their hand. So, thank you. Connor, I would go ahead and ask the person to identify yes or no.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, going to go ahead and promote you up, and if you could please identify yourself once you're up here. Hi there, Melissa. You should be able to unmute and turn on your camera. If you could please identify yourself.
Yes. Hi, my name is Melissa Slotemaker. I'm representing the applicant with AKS Engineering. I thought I'd just jump in and make a statement that the application has shown to meet the needed criteria for a metro annexation. The applicant has also going through some other land use processes with the city of Hillsborough simultaneously. There's also been an annexation agreement with the city. So there's been quite a bit of back and forth with the neighborhood and local government. And we're just asking the Metro Council to focus on the criteria before them today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification as well. There had been somebody who did have their hand up who wanted to testify again. So that's why I wanted to be very clear in what we were doing. So thank you, Melissa. All right, with that, seeing no other hands raised.
Correct.
Okay, we'll close the public comment on this portion of the meeting. And counselors, do we have any follow-up questions for staff? I guess I would just like to get reaction from staff on the actual procedural criteria that we use again, and what our response is to that.
Sure, thank you. And not to dismiss any of the concerns that people might have had, just to narrow our focus here is that a lot of the development standards, things like protection of natural resource areas, proximity of development to rights of way, traffic, all of that, those are factors that would be considered by the city when they review a potential zone change and any subsequent land division, for example, a subdivision. For Metro's role in this process, it's pretty basic in that we have these few enumerated criteria. Is it in the UGB? It is. There was already the decision made a little bit more than 20 years ago that this is an area of the metro region to be urbanized. There's an adopted community plan, the South Hillsborough Plan, that has been adopted through a public process by the city. And that plan calls for, in this specific little donut hole in this broader urban area, for urban residential development and the protection of open space. And so there's not any concept plan anymore, as one of these criteria relates to. And the property is indeed subject to measures that will prevent its urbanization until it goes through the necessary city processes. So my thoughts, I'll conclude with, are just to the extent that people have concerns about the timing and the nature of any actual development that might follow, those would go to the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions for staff? All right, this is a first reading, and we will have our second reading, council consideration and vote, scheduled for March 16th. So thank you, and much appreciated everybody who testified today. All right, we will move on to councilor communications. Marisa.
Thank you, President Peterson. Hello again, councilors. A few quick items today. I wanted to remind everyone that registration for Sedge Fest closes today. Sedge is a grass-like plant. This event is Saturday, 10:30 to 1:30 at Smith Bybee Wetlands. I am going to try to convince my brood, so you may see all 6 of us out there if you decide to go. If you'd like to attend this great educational volunteer opportunity, go online and register today. They would like us to do that. It will include food and bird watching, as well as helping to plant lots of baby sedges around the park. Weather for that day is definitely looking chilly though, so plan to bring a warm coat. And then on a related note, I wanted to give you just an update on weather closures. The impacts over the last week have really moved from east to west. After last week's snow event, our sites have largely been able to avoid being impacted. But the one exception is Chehalem Ridge Nature Park. As of last Wednesday afternoon, it was still snowing there, causing some dicey conditions, and the park has been closed until further notice. So that's all I have for you today.
Thank you. We'll move on to councilor communications. Councilors. Councilor Simpson.
Yes, thank you. A quick update, thank you, Madam President, from the Natural Areas Oversight Meeting. We met on the 23rd, and as a reminder, this committee has been meeting since the spring of 2021 to provide citizen oversight of the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond. Remaining funds from the 2006 Natural Areas Bond and capital investments from the Park and Nature Levy. Given the nature of the 2019 bond, the committee has been focused on reviewing activities and investments to date that address the 3 bond criteria of community engagement, racial equity, and climate resilience. The committee presented its year 1 report to the council back in May 2022 and is working on a year 2 report to the council this spring. At last week's meeting, the discussion focused on the committee's upcoming approach to developing a year 2 report on bond progress to the Metro Council, and heard an in-depth presentation on the upcoming community engagement activities planned around bond-funded improvements to Blue Lake Park. The committee also heard report outs from each of the 3 working groups that have been meeting to focus on topics like land acquisition, bond community engagement, and bond finance. And to wrap it up, the committee will meet again in working groups and as a full committee in April. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the update. Anybody else? Seeing no hand raised, much appreciated. It was a meeting with a lot of meat and a lot of follow-up, and so thank you to all the staff for the follow-up. And with that, with no further discussion, the council meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 7th, 2023 at 10:30 a.m.
Great, thanks.
Recording.